She was the Omega no one wanted.
Silent.
Forgotten. Humiliated before the court, until the night the Alpha King walked in. His golden eyes burned through the hall, and with one word, he shattered every whisper. She is mine. But her silence carried a prophecy, one that could crown him eternal, or bring his kingdom to ruin. Tonight, you'll hear the story of the Silent Queen. The moon hung heavy over the palace of obsidian stone, its silver light pouring through tall, arched windows and spilling across the marble floor. Torches flickered along the walls, casting long, trembling shadows against the carved reliefs of wolves and crowns. At the center of the grand hall stood a line of Omegas, women in pale gowns, their heads bowed, hearts beating fast with anticipation. Tonight was the ceremony of binding, the night when alphas from every corner of the realm would claim their destined mates. For most, it was a night of hope, of dreams fulfilled. For her, it was a night of humiliation. Alara stood near the end of the line, her hands folded tightly together to hide their trembling. Her gown was simple linen, not the silk and jewels that adorned the others. Golden hair tumbled loose down her shoulders, but there were no braids, no ornaments, nothing to catch the light. Her blue eyes stayed fixed on the floor, her throat dry, her chest aching with a silence that had followed her all her life. She was known as the Silent Omega, not because she was mute, but because she spoke rarely, never loud enough, never boldly enough. In a world where laughter and beauty and charm won hearts, her quiet nature was seen as weakness. Forgotten, overlooked, the Alphas began their choosing. One by one, towering men in cloaks of fur and armor strode before the line of Omegas. Their gazes were sharp, assessing, searching for the mate their bond would call to. When they found her, it was quick, a hand on a wrist, a vow spoken, the rush of cheers echoing through the hall. Alara stood still, invisible as each girl was claimed. Her chest grew tighter as the line shortened. 2, 3, then only her remained. The hall grew quieter. The whispers sharper. No one will take her. She's too fragile. Why waste a bond on her? Alara's nails dug into her palms. She told herself she had expected this. She had always been the shadow, the forgotten one. But hearing their cruel words still sliced deep, leaving her raw and exposed beneath the torchlight. The ceremonial elder cleared his throat, preparing to dismiss her when the great doors slammed open. The thunderous sound silenced the hall. Heads turned as a figure entered, his steps slow, deliberate, carrying the weight of command. He was taller than the others, broad-shouldered, wrapped in black and silver. His cloak swept the marble floor, lined with wolf fur so dark it seemed to drink in the torchlight. His hair was raven black, his face hard, his mouth a line of steel. But it was his eyes that held the hall captive. Gold, burning like molten fire. The Alpha King had arrived. Even the oldest alphas bowed as he passed. His presence filled the room like a storm, raw, dangerous, undeniable. Alara's breath caught in her throat as his gaze swept the line of women. He ignored the jeweled beauties who smiled at him with desperate hope. He dismissed the chosen, their wrists already claimed. His eyes found only one, her. The hall faded. The whispers vanished. Alara's body froze, her heart hammering. The Alpha King walked toward her, each step echoing against the marble floor like a drumbeat of fate. The remaining Omegas shifted nervously, praying he might look their way instead, but his gaze never wavered. He stopped before her. The elder stammered, "And my king, the choosing is nearly finished. Perhaps another." The Alpha King raised his hand. Silence crashed over the hall like thunder. His voice rang out, deep and unyielding. "She is mine." Gasps erupted. Murmurs spilled like wildfire. Alara's blue eyes widened. She dared to lift her gaze, meeting the molten gold of his. For the first time in her life, someone looked at her, not past her, not through her, but at her, as though she were the only soul in the world. His stare burned with power, possession, and something else. Certainty. The other alphas muttered. Why her? The weak one? The silent one? But the king's gaze swept the hall, silencing them with nothing more than the storm in his eyes. "She is my mate," he declared, his voice shaking the very torches on the walls. "And none will question my choice." The hall bowed. No one dared defy him. Alara's hands trembled. Her heart raced. Slowly, as though in a dream, she felt him reach for her. His hand was warm, strong, steady. The moment their skin touched, a spark rushed through her veins, searing her to him, fire and ice weaving around her soul and locking it to his. She gasped softly. The bond. The silent Omega was no longer forgotten. She had been chosen by the Alpha King. The hall remained in stunned silence as the Alpha King's words settled like thunder in the bones of every witness. Alara's hand lay trembling in his, but his grip was steady, commanding, unyielding. The elder tried to speak again, his voice thin. "Your Majesty, tradition demands the chosen be blessed before." The king's golden eyes cut through him like a blade. "She has been blessed," he said, his voice calm yet sharp with authority. "By me." No one dared speak again. The massive doors opened at his command, and cold night air swept into the hall, carrying with it the scent of pine and frost. His stride was long, purposeful, and though Alara's legs felt unsteady beneath her, his hand anchored her, pulling her forward. Every gaze burned into her back as she walked beside him. Some eyes brimmed with jealousy, others with disbelief, many with contempt. She wanted to shrink into herself, to vanish into the floor and escape their judgment. Yet his grip did not loosen. The courtyard stretched wide beneath the winter sky. Torches lined the stone path, flames crackling against the bitter air. Horses stamped their hooves, steam rising in clouds from their breath. A carriage of black iron and silver waited, wolves carved into its sides. Alara shivered, her thin gown no shield against the night. Before she could stop herself, her body trembled. Without a word, the king unclasped the heavy cloak from his shoulders and draped it around her. The fur-lined mantle engulfed her frame, its warmth instant, carrying his scent, smoke, pine, and something darker, primal. Her pulse quickened as it wrapped around her, both armor and cage. Her voice slipped out before she could bite it back. "Why me?" The words were soft, fragile as frost. For the first time, he looked down at her, truly looked. His golden eyes softened by a fraction, though they still burned with a certainty that shook her. "Because you were the only one I saw." Her lips parted, but no words came. He guided her into the carriage. Guards bowed low as they passed, their faces impassive, but their eyes curious, almost wary. Inside, the carriage was dimly lit by a single lantern. Shadows danced across the walls, flickering across his face as he settled opposite her. The wheels groaned as the carriage rolled forward, hooves crunching over frozen earth. Silence pressed between them. Alara pulled the cloak tighter, her fingers twisting into its heavy fabric. She tried not to stare, but her eyes betrayed her, stealing glances. This man had altered her life with a single declaration. She knew the stories, how he had united fractured clans beneath his banner, how his armies never lost, how his enemies vanished into whispers. He was feared, revered, untouchable. And now he was her mate. She swallowed, her voice trembling. "You don't even know me." His gaze, sharp even in shadow, pinned her where she sat. The lantern flame glimmered in his golden eyes, molten, unyielding. "I don't need to know you," he said, his voice low, each word deliberate. "The bond knows. And so do I." His certainty terrified her more than the doubt of the others ever had. To be bound forever to such a man, a king who silenced entire rooms, who bore the weight of nations, it felt impossible. She was no queen. She was nothing but the silent Omega, the overlooked, the fragile. Yet the spark that burned in her chest from his touch refused to fade. It lingered, searing, undeniable. The ride stretched long into the night. She tried to keep her breathing steady, tried not to let her fear show. But the rhythm of hooves, the sway of the carriage, the weight of his eyes upon her, it pressed heavy against her chest. At last, The carriage slowed. The wheels ground to a halt before towering gates of black steel. Beyond them, the fortress loomed, carved into the mountain itself, its spires like spears piercing the winter sky. Torches blazed along the walls, casting light against the black stone. The gates creaked open with the groan of giants. Alera's breath hitched. She had never seen anything so vast, so cold, so unyielding. This was not a palace of gold or marble, like those of lesser rulers. This was a fortress, a kingdom forged for war, as unbreakable as the man who ruled it. The king stepped out first, his cloak brushing the frozen ground. He turned, offering his hand to her once more. She hesitated, her heart a storm, but at last placed her trembling fingers in his. The bond flared again. Fire and ice surged through her veins. She stumbled, her knees weak, but his arm came around her instantly, steadying her. "From this night on," he said quietly, his voice only for her, "you are no longer forgotten. You are mine, and the world will know it." Her breath shuddered. Fear still coiled in her chest, but his words lit a spark of something else, something she had thought long dead. Hope. Dawn broke cold and pale over the mountain fortress, snow still falling in thin veils across the high windows. The stone halls of the keep echoed with the shuffle of servants and the murmur of courtiers gathering in anticipation. Alera's new world was alive with eyes. She walked at the king's side through a corridor lined with banners bearing his crest, a silver wolf beneath a crescent moon. Guards stood rigid at attention, their gazes fixed forward, but she could feel it. Curiosity, judgment, disbelief. The silent Omega who had never been chosen, now carried as mate and queen by the Alpha King himself. Her fingers tightened in the heavy cloak he had given her. She kept her eyes lowered, though she could sense the weight of his golden gaze glancing toward her from time to time, studying, commanding. The great doors to the throne hall opened. The chamber beyond surged with light and voices. Nobles in silks and furs lined the long tables, their jewels glinting in the torchlight. Murmurs swelled as the king entered, his presence cutting through the noise like a blade. Alera followed, her steps measured, though her chest felt as though it might burst from the pressure of so many stairs. Whispers spread like fire. Her, the silent one. She was never chosen before. Too fragile, too soft for a king. Alera's skin burned under the weight of their voices. The king moved to the dais where his throne of black stone rose. He did not take his seat immediately. Instead, he pulled her forward, so she stood beside him in clear view of every soul in the hall. The contrast was stark, his tall, broad figure cloaked in shadow, his golden eyes like fire, and her, pale and slender, her golden hair loose like spilled sunlight, her blue eyes downcast. He raised his hand for silence. His voice rang out, low and absolute. "This is my mate, my queen, and she will be treated as such." The chamber fell still. No one dared speak against him, though the whispers still simmered beneath the surface, unspoken but heavy. Alera's heart pounded. She wanted to shrink, to vanish, to hide herself away. But his hand brushed against hers, the smallest touch, grounding her like an anchor in a storm. The council began. Petitions of land disputes, reports of unrest at the borders, rumors of rival pacts stirring in the frozen north. Alera remained silent, listening, her gaze lowered. Silence had always been her shield, her way of enduring unseen. Yet here, at the king's side, her quiet carried a new weight. It did not go unnoticed. A noblewoman draped in emerald furs finally sneered across the chamber. "Does the queen not speak?" Her voice was sharp, mocking, every word laced with poison. Or is she only here to warm the throne? Gasps rippled. Heads turned. Alera froze, her cheeks burning hot, shame crawling up her throat. She lowered her gaze, ready to retreat into her silence, as she had always done. But before she could, the king's voice thundered across the hall. "You will not question her place." The words silenced the chamber at once. His golden eyes fixed on the offender, molten and merciless. Her silence, he growled, is worth more than your endless noise. The noblewoman blanched, shrinking into her seat. No one else dared speak. The king's gaze lingered long enough to sear his point into the bones of every witness before he returned to his throne. But Alara, her breath shuddered, her chest tightened. His words had struck deeper than any blade. For the first time, her silence had not been mocked, not dismissed. It had been defended, valued. The council wore on. Alara sat still, her hands folded, her mind a storm. Yet each time her thoughts turned to doubt, to fear, to the whispers of weakness, she felt the warmth of his hand brushing against hers, reminding her of his vow before them all. When at last the council adjourned and the nobles drifted away in hushed clusters, Alara followed him back through the torchlit corridors. The murmurs of the court still echoed in her ears, sharp and cruel. But louder still was his voice, unyielding, undeniable. Her silence is worth more than your noise. Inside the solitude of his chambers, she dared to whisper, her voice trembling. You defended me. He turned, his expression unreadable, but his golden eyes burned with the same fire that had silenced the hall. I will always defend you. Her throat tightened. She lowered her gaze quickly, hiding the tears that stung her eyes. But the Alpha King saw, he always saw. And though he said no more, he moved closer, his hand brushing hers once again. The gesture was small, almost tentative, but it carried the weight of something far greater. Alara's silence still clung to her like a second skin, but for the first time, she wondered if perhaps it was not weakness at all. Perhaps, in his eyes, it was strength. Night fell thick and heavy, the storm outside clawing at the castle walls. The keep's torches hissed in the icy wind that seeped through the cracks of stone. Alara sat in the king's chamber, wrapped in the fur cloak he had given her, the fire casting gold across her pale skin. The king stood by the long table, maps spread before him. His dark head bent in thought, strong hands braced against the wood. Alara's blue eyes followed him in silence. Even when he was still, he seemed made of motion. A predator wound tight, the weight of a kingdom pressing against his shoulders. She wondered if he ever slept. The silence stretched, but it was not comfortable. Something about it felt restless. The king finally looked up, as though he could feel her thoughts. His golden eyes burned even in the dim light. You doubt yourself again, he said. It was not a question. Alara's breath caught. She dropped her gaze to the fire, fingers twisting in her gown. I hear them, she whispered, her voice small. The whispers. They say I am not enough, that I am too quiet, too small, that I cannot stand at your side. The king pushed away from the table and crossed the chamber. His presence filled the air, heavy and unyielding. When he reached her, he knelt, a king lowering himself before an omega. His large hand cupped hers gently, his thumb brushing her pale skin. You are not small, he said, his voice low, steady. You are the fire that steadies me when the storm rages. Do you think strength is only measured by the roar of a voice?
No.
Sometimes it is silence that endures when all else breaks. Her throat tightened, tears pricking her eyes. She lifted her gaze to him, her blue eyes shimmering. But will they ever accept me? His golden gaze burned into hers. They will, because I have chosen you, and one day they will see what I see. Her lips parted, but before she could answer, the sound of horns shattered the night.
Sharp. Urgent.
Warning! The king was on his feet instantly, his cloak snapping as he strode to the door. Stay here, he commanded, his voice steel. Alara's heart leapt. Where are you going? An intruder. His jaw clenched, his voice clipped. Someone dares breach these walls. The door slammed shut behind him. But Alara could not stay. Something deep within her rebelled at the command. Quiet as shadow, she slipped from the chamber, her bare feet soft against the cold stone. She followed the clash of steel and the shouts of guards until she reached the courtyard. The world outside was chaos. Torches flared. Snow churned underfoot as guards battled cloaked figures whose faces were hidden by shadow. Wolves howled in the distance, the sound carrying on the icy wind. And there, the king. He moved like fire incarnate, every strike merciless, every roar shaking the night. His golden eyes glowed, his strength unmatched. For a moment Alara's breath caught in awe, until she heard it. One of the intruders, his voice cutting above the clash of steel. She will be his undoing. The silent one will bring the king to ruin. Alara froze, her blood turning to ice. The intruder's gaze snapped toward her, locking on with a predator's certainty. And in that moment she understood. They were not here for conquest. They were here for her. Her steps faltered, snow crunching beneath her feet. Before she could retreat, one of the attackers lunged toward her. Alara stumbled back, her blonde hair whipping in the wind, her blue eyes wide with fear. But the king was faster. With a snarl, he intercepted, his hand closing around the intruder's throat. He lifted the man as if he weighed nothing, then flung him into the snow, broken and gasping. The courtyard went still. The attackers fled into the storm, their cries vanishing into the night. Only the hiss of torches and the crunch of boots remained. The king turned to her, chest heaving, his eyes burning molten gold. His fury was sharp, but not directed at his enemies. At her. "I told you to stay inside," he growled. Alara's throat tightened, tears welling. They said I'll be your ruin." His expression softened, though the fire in his eyes did not fade. He strode to her, his hand rising to cradle her face, his thumb brushing away a tear. "You will not be my ruin," he said fiercely, his voice breaking like thunder. "You are my salvation." Her lips parted, her breath trembling in her chest. His words wrapped around her like a shield, silencing every whisper that had ever haunted her. For the first time, she did not feel small. She felt chosen. The night grew still again. Snowflakes drifted softly across the courtyard, settling over blood and broken steel. The world was quiet, but in Alara's chest, a storm raged louder than ever. The castle did not sleep that night. Guards doubled their patrols, torches blazed against the snow, and every door was barred with steel. Yet even with the keep fortified, Alara felt the tremor of unease winding through the stone walls. She sat by the fire in the king's chamber, her cloak drawn tightly around her shoulders. Her golden hair spilled over the fur, her blue eyes fixed on the flames. She tried to still her trembling hands, but the intruder's words echoed in her mind. "The silent one will bring the king to ruin." The king entered, his boots heavy against the stone. His golden eyes were sharp, his jaw clenched tight. But when his gaze fell on her, something softened, if only slightly. "You should not have come into the courtyard," he said. His voice was low, not scolding, but edged with fear. Alara swallowed hard. "They were not after you. They were after me." His silence confirmed it. Her breath trembled.
Why?
He did not answer. Not at once. Instead, he turned to the fire, staring into the flames as though searching for words. Finally, he said, "Because of old stories. Whispers from a time long before ours. Of a queen who would decide the fate of kings." Her heart thudded. "Stories?" He glanced back at her, his gaze burning. "Prophecies." The word hung in the air, heavier than stone. Alara's fingers curled into her cloak. "What do they say?" "That a silent queen will bring either salvation or ruin. That her choice will bind the Alpha to eternal night or dawn everlasting." His voice dropped, his eyes fixed on hers. "You." Her breath caught, fear clawing up her throat. "And you believe this?" He stepped closer, his presence fierce and unyielding. "I believe in what I see. And I see you." His conviction should have soothed her. But the words of the intruder cut deeper, echoing like poison. She will be his undoing. That night, when the king finally left to oversee his men, Alara could not remain idle. The whispers gnawed at her. The fear grew too sharp. So she wandered. The keep was vast, its halls lined with banners, its stairways winding deep into the mountain stone. Guided only by flickering candles, she found herself drawn to the old library. The chamber was a cavern of shadows, its shelves heavy with dust and forgotten knowledge. She lit a candle, its glow casting trembling light across ancient tomes. Her fingers brushed along cracked spines until one book caught her eye, bound in dark leather, its cover worn smooth with age. She drew it out, the weight of it heavy in her hands. The pages were brittle, ink faded but still legible. And there it was, the prophecy of the Silent Queen. She read the words slowly, her lips moving though no sound escaped. The queen who speaks not shall decide the fate of kings. Her silence will summon ruin or salvation. The alpha she chooses shall rise eternal or fall to shadow. Her voice, when broken, shall shatter kingdoms. Her pulse thundered. The ink was surrounded by sketches. Crowns, wolves, and fire consuming a kingdom. And in the margin, scrawled by a hand long dead, the choice is hers alone. None can change it. Alara's breath trembled. The words pressed down on her chest until it hurt to breathe. The choice is mine. When the king found her hours later, she was still in the library, the book open in her lap, her blue eyes wide and haunted. He strode toward her quickly, his golden eyes narrowing. You should not be here alone. She looked up at him, her lips trembling. It is true, isn't it? All of it. My silence holds your fate.
His jaw tightened.
For a long moment he said nothing. Then he dropped to one knee beside her, his hand closing gently over hers. If that is true, he said, his voice rough with conviction, then let it be so. If my fate rests in you, then I welcome it. For I would rather fall by your hand than live without you. Her throat tightened, tears pricking her eyes. His words should have comforted her, but they terrified her even more. Because now she knew, the prophecy was not a story. It was her destiny. Snow thickened along the battlements, muting the world into silence. But within the keep, tension throbbed like a drumbeat. Messengers came daily, their cloaks frozen, their voices grave. Wolves had been seen in the northern forests, moving in packs larger than any had known. Fires burned on distant ridges, signals that carried across the wilds. The king doubled the guard, sharpened steel, and drilled men until their arms trembled. Yet no matter how strong the walls, Alara felt the weight of the prophecy pressing down on every shadowed hall. Her silence will summon ruin or salvation. And the nobles whispered louder than ever. Some avoided her gaze entirely, as though she were cursed. Others stared openly, their eyes sharp with suspicion. To them, she was no queen, she was a danger. But the king never wavered. He carried himself through the corridors like an unyielding storm, golden eyes daring anyone to speak against him. And when he passed her, his touch always lingered, a grounding reminder that no prophecy, no enemy, could take her from his side. Still, she could feel the storm building. It broke on the fourth morning after her discovery in the library. The blare of trumpets shattered the dawn, calling men to the courtyard. Alara rushed to the high windows, her breath catching as the gates groaned open. Through the snow rode a host of black-cloaked figures, their horses steaming in the cold. At their head was a man unlike any she had seen before. The Northern Alpha. His presence alone bent the air. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his hair black as a raven's wing, his eyes a pale gray like frozen steel. He wore no crown, but the land itself seemed to bow to him. The king stood waiting in the courtyard below, his golden eyes burning like fire against the frost. Cloaked in black and gold, he was every inch a ruler, his authority undeniable. The two alphas faced each other in silence. The courtyard was still, as though the very snow held its breath. Then the Northern Alpha dismounted. His boots crunched against the ice, his voice carrying easily across the frozen air. "You hide her well, brother," he said, though no blood bound them. His gaze slid upward, straight to the battlements, to Alara. Her breath caught. His eyes locked with hers.
Cold.
Assessing.
Claiming.
But whispers travel faster than ravens, he continued, a cruel smile tugging at his lips. The silent queen, the one who decides fate. She belongs to me. Gasps rippled through the king's men. Alara's heart slammed in her chest. The king's voice rang out, sharp as steel. She is mine. The words struck the courtyard like thunder. The rival Alpha tilted his head, his gray eyes glinting. All the more reason to take her. Do you think fate bends to your will alone?
No.
Fate bows to power, and I will take what power I wish. The king's fists curled at his sides, his muscles taut beneath his cloak. He took one step forward, his voice a low growl. Try. The air crackled with violence. The men shifted uneasily, hands on hilts, wolves snarling under their breath. For a heartbeat, Alara thought the world would break open in war right there. But the rival Alpha laughed softly, shaking his head. Not today, he said. He swung back into the saddle with the ease of a predator unhurried. But when the snows melt, when the rivers flood, and the gods demand blood, I will return, and we shall see whose Omega she truly is. With that, he turned his host, the thunder of hooves carrying them back into the forest, swallowed by frost and shadow. The courtyard exhaled, though the air remained taut with dread. The king did not move. His golden eyes stayed fixed on the horizon long after the riders vanished. His jaw was clenched, his power simmering like a storm held barely in check. Alara stood frozen at the battlements above, her hands gripping the stone until her knuckles burned. The Northern Alpha had looked at her as if she already belonged to him. And worse, she felt, deep in her bones, that he would come again. That night, the keep felt colder than ever. When the king entered her chamber, his presence filling the silence, Alara turned to him, her voice soft, trembling. He knew me, she whispered. The king strode to her, his eyes blazing gold. He will not have you. Her throat tightened. But if the prophecy is true, if I must choose. His hand slammed against the wall beside her, caging her in, his body towering over hers, his breath hot against her skin. Then choose me. Her heart thundered, her lips trembling. She wanted to say it. She wanted to scream it. But fear coiled tight in her throat, her silence louder than any word. The king's hand softened, brushing her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. His voice was low, fierce, unshakable. I will not let him touch you. Even if the gods themselves demand it, I will fight them. You are mine, Alara.
Mina forever.
Her blue eyes shimmered with tears. Her silence was not rejection, he knew it now. It was fear. And within that fear, love still burned. Winter wrapped its claws tighter around the keep. The snows came heavier, the nights longer, the howls of wolves echoing in the distance like warnings from the old gods themselves. The Northern Alpha's threat hung over the castle like a shadow no fire could banish. Every torch seemed to burn lower, every hallway whispered with unease. The men drilled from dawn until dusk, their knuckles raw, their blades sharp. Even the strongest among them looked over their shoulders more often now. Alara walked those halls like a ghost. The noble stares followed her wherever she went, some sharp with suspicion, others wide with fear. Their whispers trailed her steps, the silent one, the prophecy, the ruin of kings. But she did not break, because beside her, the king stood unwavering. His golden eyes silenced nobles more effectively than a blade. His hand never strayed far from hers. And when the whispers grew too loud, his presence was enough to quiet the storm inside her chest. Yet she felt the weight of it all pressing heavier every day. The prophecy.
The choice.
The rival Alpha's gray eyes in the snow. And worst of all, the bond between her and the king, burning brighter with every passing night. It began one evening when the wind howled through the towers and snow pressed thick against the windows. Alara sat by the fire in his chamber, her pale hands folded tightly in her lap, her golden hair loose about her shoulders. The flames painted her in gold, but her blue eyes were clouded, heavy with thoughts unsaid. The king entered, snow clinging to his cloak, his jaw hard from another day of war councils. He paused at the sight of her, something in his expression softening, though only for her. "You're quiet tonight," he said. She gave a small, bitter smile. "I am always quiet." A faint curve tugged at his mouth. "That is true. But tonight, your silence feels heavier." Her chest tightened. She looked down at her hands. "Sometimes I wonder if I am truly what you wanted." The king froze. For a heartbeat, he simply stared at her, his golden eyes unreadable. Then he crossed the chamber and knelt before her, his large hand lifting to rest gently against her cheek. "You are exactly what I wanted," he said, his voice low and fierce. "Do you not yet see? I could have claimed anyone, yet it was you I chose. And I would choose you again 1,000 times over." Her lips trembled. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling silently down her cheeks. "I hear the whispers," she admitted, her voice cracking. "They say I am weak, that I am a burden, that I will never stand as your equal." His jaw clenched. His golden eyes burned like fire. "They are fools," he growled. "Strength does not always roar. Sometimes it endures. And you, Alara, have endured more than they could ever imagine. Do not let their noise define you." The fire cracked between them. Her breath hitched, her chest aching. For the first time, she reached up, her slender fingers brushing against his jaw. His skin was warm beneath her touch, his breath caught, the unshakable king stilled by her hand. "You frighten me," she whispered. His brows furrowed. "Why?" "Because I have never belonged to anyone," she said softly, "and now I belong to you." For a long moment, silence wrapped around them. Then the king leaned forward, his forehead resting gently against hers. His voice was rough, almost a vow.
No, Alara. You do not belong to me.
"You belong with me." Her heart broke open at the words. A sob caught in her throat, and then his lips brushed hers. Not fierce, not demanding. Gentle, reverent. A promise sealed in firelight. Her silence shattered, not with words, but with that kiss. The days that followed felt different. She walked the halls with her head held higher. When nobles sneered, she did not falter. When whispers reached her ears, she did not crumble. Because she remembered his words, his vow, "You belong with me." But outside, the snow deepened. The rival Alpha lingered beyond the horizon, and his promise was carved into the cold. "When the moon is full, she will choose." And the moon, silver, merciless, crept closer with every night. The nights grew sharper as the full moon neared. Snow draped the castle like a burial shroud, the winds howling like wolves across the mountains. Inside, the keep was alive with preparation, soldiers drilling until their knuckles split, smiths hammering steel until sparks burned their hands, servants moving silently with fear in their eyes. Alara could feel it in the air. The waiting. The prophecy stretched its claws closer with every day, every hour, every breath. One morning, a messenger staggered to the gates, his cloak torn, his skin frozen blue. He carried a single parchment, pinned with a dagger black as night. The words were written in a cruel, steady hand. "When the moon is full, she will stand between us. And the gods will see whose Omega she truly is." The keep fell into silence. The king tore the parchment from the man's hand, his jaw clenching, his golden eyes molten. He burned it in the fire before the nobles could whisper over it, but the message had already spread through the castle like plague. Every corner of the keep seemed to hum with those words, "She will stand between us." That night, Alara dreamed of wolves. One golden, one gray, both circling her in the snow, their eyes burning, their growls shaking the earth. The moon above split the sky in two, silver fire bleeding across the horizon. When she reached out her hand, both wolves lunged, one for her heart, the other for her throat. She woke gasping in the dark, the king's arm heavy around her waist. Her body trembled as she slipped from the bed and pulled a cloak tight around her shoulders. She wandered to the balcony, snow glittering like glass under the moonlight. And then she heard it.
A howl. Low. Distant.
But it carried through the night like a blade slicing silence apart. The rival Alpha. Her breath shook, her blue eyes scanning the forest below.
He was out there, watching, waiting.
The king joined her moments later, his warmth enveloping her from behind. His golden gaze followed hers into the dark. "He's closer than I thought," he murmured, his voice sharp with restraint. Her throat tightened. "What if he comes for me?" He pulled her against him, his lips brushing her hair. "Then let him come. I will tear the world apart before I let him take you." She wanted to believe him, but the prophecy's weight pressed heavy in her chest. The full moon rose. The night was sharp as glass, the air thick with silence. Torches blazed across the courtyard, casting long shadows across the snow. Men stood armed, their swords gleaming, their wolves pacing with restless growls. The gates creaked open. From the forest shadows emerged the rival Alpha and his host. Cloaked in black, their eyes glowed silver in the torchlight. At their head, the northern Alpha dismounted with unhurried grace, his pale gray eyes fixed not on the king, but on her. "It is time," he said, his voice carrying cold across the courtyard. The king descended the steps, his cloak snapping in the wind, his golden eyes blazing fire. "She is mine," he growled, his voice thunder over stone. The rival Alpha's lips curled. "Then let her choose." The world froze. Every soldier's breath held. Every wolf's growl cut short. Even the storm seemed to pause, the snow falling slower, as if the gods themselves leaned in to watch. Alara's heart pounded in her chest. Her hands trembled as she gripped the stone battlements, her golden hair whipping in the icy wind. Both men stared at her, one with fire, one with ice. And in that moment, she knew. The prophecy had come for her. The king looked up, his golden eyes burning with fury and something deeper, love, desperate and raw. "Alara," he called, his voice breaking across the courtyard. "Choose me." The rival Alpha's gray gaze was colder, sharper. "Do not bind yourself to ruin," he said, his voice soft but carrying. "The gods demand power, not weakness. Choose me, and the world will bend to you." Her breath tore from her chest. Her lips parted, but nothing came. Fear clutched her throat, the silence she had carried all her life pressing tighter, heavier, crueler than ever. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. She wanted to tell the world the truth of her heart. But her voice was trapped, strangled by the prophecy itself. The rival Alpha's smile widened. "She cannot speak. She is mine already." The king bared his teeth, a growl ripping from his chest. His body trembled with rage, with a bond pulling taut between them. "She is not yours." Their wolves burst forth. Two giants of fur and fury, one golden, one gray. They clashed with thunderous force, claws raking, teeth snapping, blood spattering hot against snow. Warriors roared, wolves howled, steel clanged. And Alara stood frozen in the storm of it all, her blue eyes wide with terror, her heart screaming words her lips could not. Until, enough! The cry ripped from her throat like lightning. Her voice, hoarse, trembling, but real, shattered the silence that had bound her for so long. The entire courtyard froze. Even the wolves halted, their golden and gray eyes snapping to her. Alara stepped forward, her bare feet sinking into the snow, her golden hair a halo in the moonlight. Her hands shook, but her voice grew stronger with every word. "I am not afraid anymore. I am not weak. I am not silent." Her blue eyes blazed, locked on the king. "I choose you." The rival Alpha snarled, rage flashing in his gray eyes. He lunged, his massive wolf form coiling to strike. But the king surged forward, golden fire in his gaze, his roar shaking the earth. With one final clash, he drove his brother into the snow, broken and defeated. Silence fell. Only Alara's voice echoed still in the night air, a voice that had broken kingdoms' worth of prophecy with a single choice. The courtyard lay silent beneath the full moon. Snow drifted softly over blood and broken steel, muffling the chaos that had raged only moments before. Warriors stood frozen, their breaths steaming in the cold, their eyes fixed on the two wolves locked in the snow. The king stood over his brother, his golden fur bristling, his chest heaving with the effort of the fight. Beneath him, the rival Alpha writhed, his gray eyes flashing with fury and disbelief. Blood stained the snow between them, steaming where it fell. Above it all stood Alara. Her breath rose in white clouds, her blue eyes shining brighter than the torches, her golden hair tangled by the storm. Her bare feet were numb in the snow, but she felt nothing except the fire burning in her chest. The silence stretched, heavy, unbroken. Then, slowly, the rival Alpha shifted back to his human form, broken but still proud. His gray eyes snapped up to her, his voice hoarse but cutting. "You think this is over? You think words alone can break prophecy?" He spat blood into the snow, his teeth red.
"No.
Your silence is a curse, and when it returns, it will devour him." Alara's chest tightened. Fear flickered, but only for a moment, because she had already spoken. Her voice, trembling and fierce, had carried across gods and men alike. And for the first time, she knew what it meant to be heard. She stepped forward, snow crunching beneath her feet. Every eye turned toward her, every breath held. She looked down at the rival Alpha, her voice steady. "You are wrong." The courtyard gasped, for it was the first time they had heard her speak more than a whisper. Alara's gaze burned like ice and flame. "My silence was never a curse. It was my strength. And tonight I chose who I am. I chose him." Her hand lifted, pointing toward the king. "The Alpha King. My mate. My salvation." The rival Alpha's gray eyes widened. For the first time, uncertainty cracked through his cold mask. The king shifted back, rising tall and bloodied in the snow. His golden eyes locked on hers, fierce and unyielding. He crossed the courtyard in long strides, his body still trembling from the fight. When he reached her, his blood-stained hand rose to cup her face, as though she were the only thing in the world worth touching. "You saved me," he whispered, his voice breaking. Alara shook her head, tears spilling hot down her cheeks.
"No.
You saved me long before this night." And before the watching court, beneath the falling snow and the gaze of gods, she rose onto her toes and pressed her lips to his. A kiss, soft, unyielding, eternal. The rival Alpha's cry of rage split the air, but it was already too late. The bond had been sealed. Her voice had spoken her choice, and the prophecy had bent to her will. The king turned, his golden eyes blazing. With one final strike, he drove his brother into the snow, broken beyond rising. The courtyard erupted in roars. Warriors howled their triumph, wolves lifted their voices to the moon. The storm itself seemed to bow to the moment, snow falling softer, gentler, like a blessing. Alara swayed, exhaustion pressing down on her. But the king's arm was instantly around her, strong and steady. He held her as though she were the heart of his world. And perhaps she was. The days that followed were filled with whispers, but no longer of doubt. The nobles who had once sneered now bowed. The courtiers who had once whispered now fell silent in awe. The story of the silent queen spread like wildfire, carried from hall to hall, kingdom to kingdom. The prophecy had been fulfilled, but not as the rival Alpha had wished. Her silence had not destroyed a king. It had saved one. One night, as snow melted into spring, Alara stood with the king on the balcony of the keep. The moon glowed silver above them, but this time, it held no threat. Only light. Her golden hair gleamed in the breeze, her blue eyes soft as she turned to him. "Do you think they will ever stop doubting me?" The king's arm tightened around her waist. His golden gaze burned steady, certain. "Let them doubt. It changes nothing. You are mine. And now, they know it too." Alara's lips curved, her silence soft but no longer heavy. For the first time, she felt not overlooked, not fragile, not forgotten. She was queen. And when she pressed her head against his chest, listening to the steady thunder of his heart, she knew the truth the prophecy had never spoken. Her silence had been her curse. But her voice, her choice, had been her freedom. And the world would remember her name.